Welcome to Scoreography, a podcast about the greatest sport on ice, figure skating. I'm Wendy Buskey.
And I'm Adrian Buskey. And this time we're doing something a little bit different. We're going to be discussing the experience of Worlds and the modernization of the sport of figure skating with a guest. So we have Haley from the Instagram account FS.SkatingStan, which is an account we've been following for a while that I think is honestly like one of the best fan accounts out there. One of the most instructive, informational, best designed. I do all of our graphics for Scoreography stuff, and I'm a graphic designer, and our stuff doesn't look good. So I'm so impressed with what you do. So Haley, welcome to the show, and tell us a little bit about what you do and specifically what you do with that account.
Yes, well, thank you so much, Adrian and Wendy, for having me. I'm so excited to be here and chatting with you all about the best sport on ice, but honestly in the world, figure skating. So just to give a little bit more background on my account, FS.SkatingStan. Growing up, I was a competitive figure skater, ended up ending my career to go to college. And while I was in college, I was still keeping up with a lot of competitions, watching the Junior Grand Prix events, just keeping up with skating while a lot of my peers, a lot of my training mates were focused on school, as they probably should have been. And we're not really keeping up with what was going on in the skating world. And so at some point, they were like, you should create an Instagram account to actually have people to chat with skating about, like to actually talk with other super fans so that you can talk about your love for the sport. You can talk about the highly detailed events that you're watching. So I created my account back in, I think it was 2021, and it actually was originally called Satoko.Stan because Satoko Miyahara is one of my favorite figure skaters. Unfortunately, when she retired a few years ago, I ended up changing the name just to clarify that I was not a Satoko fan account, but also just to kind of make sure that the page was still kind of appealing to a wider demographic of skating fans. So I've had the account since 2021. It kind of initially started off as just an account to follow different events and post about exciting junior and senior skaters and performances. And over time, as you kind of indicated, it's really evolved into an account that also provides analysis, a look at how the sport can be modernized and improved, what has been done and what can be done moving forward. And then also most recently at Worlds, I started featuring interviews with skaters, which was a really exciting development in the account. So I really appreciate all the kind words that you said about it. My background is in communications and social media. And so a lot of the work on the account are tools and skills that I've learned in my professional life that I get to bring to the skating world. And so it's been a really enjoyable and amazing project that I've been engaged in these last few years.
I so appreciate you calling out that your friends were like, why don't you put this online so that we can learn from you and also keep up with each other and talk to other people who get really into the nitty gritty of the sport. Because as people who have a lot of friends who are not skating fans, a lot of them are very curious. So they want to understand more. So I have actually directed people to your account because I'm like, you'll learn.
Oh.
But also it has been wonderful to like build that community, actually being able to talk about these things without having to be like, okay, now let me pull out the Wikipedia page that I can send you so that you understand who Satoko Miyahara is.
I totally relate to that because I was talking to my dad the other day, and he's kind of like an every 4 years type Olympic fan, but I was trying to explain the state of US pairs right now. And I was realizing as I was talking to him that I had to keep like backing up and like explaining other developments first. And it was just very difficult. So it is really nice, as you mentioned, to have that community of people who just instantly get it because skating is such a niche sport that for me, at least, when I talk to people about skating, typically the first thing they'll mention is Tanya Harding or Michelle Kwan.
I get a lot of Johnny Weir.
Right. And so there's that more knowledgeable kind of perspective that you're hoping to like learn from and engage in. You don't often get in the real world. So it is nice to have that online community. But also something that I've noticed too is like, I think for me, when I started my account, I was thinking about connecting with other like big super fans, but I feel like over time, it's been a much more diverse group of fans that have kind of started following me. So, I have folks who DM me asking for advice on how to distinguish jumps when they're watching competitions. And so that's a video idea I have in mind. I put out a graphic recently on how to read a figure skating protocol, and that was because someone DM'd me who was a new fan and just did not understand how to read that. And that's also, and we'll get into this, but that is such an important part of being a skating fan is understanding or trying to understand at least the judging. And when you don't understand
Yes.
the judging or how scores were calculated, that can really hinder your enjoyment of the sport. And so that was really fun because growing up as a competitive skater, I learned how to read my own protocols when I was like 11 or 12, but it's almost something I took for granted where like I kind of knew how things worked, or you kind of inherently know how the numbers come to be. But looking at it from more the perspective of, okay, if I'm a first time fan who's never seen a protocol and I need to know how these numbers are calculated and what these symbols mean, where do I start? Like that was a really great intellectual exercise in terms of reminding myself too, like how these scores actually come to be and how the performance gets turned into a numerical score.
Oh my gosh, all of that. It is
Yeah.
such a complicated mess to try to explain to someone. So, yes, having to take that step backwards. And it is so fortunate that you had that experience to pull from. I come from the tech world. I have always thought of it as like in web development terms, it's how do you translate something that is so inherently part of your day to day to someone who's never seen this before. And in figure skating, especially if you are the every 4 year fan, which there are many of, it's so confusing. Adrian and I talk about this ad nauseum.
Yeah. One of the things that comes up with us a lot is that so many mainstream sports are based on very simple, basic rules. You know, if you, so many of them are, there are goals on two sides and you go back and forth and try to put something in the goal, you know, whether that's soccer or football or basketball, and even things like baseball, which are more complicated in a lot of ways. And there are lots of complications on top of those rule sets, but they're fundamentally pretty easy to pick up because they all stem from like schoolyard games. And skating is fundamentally so different from that. What I think is one of the greatest entry points, which is its connection with music, the aspect of it that is so artistic. I think that for a person watching it, even if they have no idea what's happening with the scores, they can connect with the music and the performance and still enjoy it, even if they don't know why those numbers come in that way on the protocol. But the deeper that you get into the sport, the more complicated it becomes and the more frustrating it can become because the scoring can feel so arcane and obscure and sometimes so unfair. And it's really difficult to figure out, you know, what jumps a person is doing. Wendy's really good at knowing them because she's a lifelong fan. I still don't always pick them out individually. I've gotten a little better about it over time, but it can also feel like there's a bridge that you have to jump over between being the casual fan who can just watch something and just enjoy it versus the one who now needs to kind of break down the numbers and figure out why something is the way it is. There's a hurdle that you jump from one position where you can be a casual who can go in and out and just like it to the one who's more concerned about why the sport is the way it is. Is the scoring fair? Does it all make sense? And I think that once you make that jump, it's when people start getting frustrated because then they're like, I want this to work and it doesn't make sense to me. And the sport itself doesn't make it any easier to actually find that information and to make it easier for a broader audience to figure out. I think Johnny and Tara have done a pretty good job over the years of explaining for the casual, like why things are happening. Although I think that for us and a lot of other people now that are a little bit deeper into the sport, the ISU feeds are kind of more enjoyable because I think they do get a little bit more technical sometimes. They also kind of know when to stop talking and just let the performance happen. But
Yes.
I'm curious for you in this level of communication, how challenging do you find it to illustrate those concepts to people, particularly if they're fairly new into it? Because, I mean, even us, I mean, I've been watching skating now for probably about 20 years. Wen is a lifelong fan, and we still get things wrong. I mean, we're always saying to our audience, correct us if we don't have this right. I mean, we're out reading the same blogs and the same information that you are, and sometimes we don't get the interpretation correct. So how challenging is that? And like, where are you pulling from to make those things make sense?
Yes, it is much more difficult than I think people realize. As you mentioned, Adrian, I think skating, it's difficult to find information and resources. Like you really need to know where to look. I think for me, I definitely depend on skatingscores.com, skating Reddit, and the links that people share there. I can't remember what website it was, but I found a website once that tells you from different Warhorse pieces of music, like which skaters have skated to what. And I don't remember if it was skating specific, but I definitely think resources like that are so crucial. So you want to watch figure skating, obviously Jackie Wong, anything GOE, a lot of the bigger accounts that provide news and updates and information. But honestly, like there are times when I find myself actually reading the ISU statements or the rule books just to get to the actual root of what I'm looking for to find the actual text that I can cite. I feel like because skating is such a niche sport and you don't necessarily have a lot of voices of authority, if you want to call it that, sometimes you just have to like read the text yourself. And I'm very lucky in that I have the time and the energy to do that. But I think going back to your question, Adrian, I think when communicating this type of information about the sport to newer fans, especially through social media is so highly visual. And so what I do is I try and find a creative vehicle to communicate that information. So for example, a few seasons ago, I did a graphic on the Grand Prix series and how skaters are selected and what people can look forward to. It could have been just a regular carousel graphic where you just have a bunch of text on the page. And what I decided to do is go with like a scrapbook theme and almost like create a graphic that looked like you were reading a scrapbook and looking at different photos and different like visual illustrations that also communicated the information of the Grand Prix series. And the World Team Trophy graphic that I just posted, I wanted to make it look like you were reading like a comic book and making it just like a little bit more fun and visually pleasing and attractive to not only skating fans, just someone who's scrolling through social media. And so while I obviously value accuracy and I always want to make sure that I'm including the most accurate or up-to-date information that I can, I also think it's not enough just to be accurate. We also need to be, we as in content creators, we need to be thinking of ways to really hook the audience in through video, through photo, through other mediums, because, and we can get into this, but figure skating, it's a sport that I want to see become more popular. And I think there's a lot of ways we can do that, but I think social media is a tool that when we use correctly, we can, make strides in reaching newer and bigger audiences.
I want to dig into your world's experience, but I think what you were talking about there is really important when we think about the reach of the sport, because what you said there resonates with me, and I'm sure it does for Wen as well, in trying to take a sport that we love so much and get it back to a broader audience. When we started Scoreography 3 odd years ago, at the time when we were just then looking around for other shows, a lot of them were very technical and very in the weeds and didn't feel very accessible for a newer or casual fan. And so that's what we set out to do. We wanted to make the one that was going to be the easiest entry point. And if that meant that some people would find that we weren't technical enough, that we weren't digging through all the protocols, or we weren't as centric around edges or things like that, that was fine, because that wasn't what we were setting out to do. We wanted to make an entry point for new fans or people who were not as like glued into it all of the time. And if other people like us, great, but that was the initial intent. And it is trying to figure out how to communicate to a broader audience. And I feel like skating for a while as an industry, as a sport, as a federation, it just feels like they fell really far behind so many of the other mainstream sports. And I think it's easy to qualify it as an Olympic sport because things like gymnastics and this like are all like based around their quadrennials, and it matters so much more in that context. And a lot of people only see it because of the Olympics. But it wasn't always like that, in the sense that people would point to the heyday of the 90s and even the late 80s and the huge popularity that it had, and then how it's fallen off. I saw you talk about in one of those posts the efforts that the ISU made at modernization when it came to the world's experience. in both their presentation at the event, having like the LEDs, having the introductions of the skaters from the side rather than them going out on the ice, and just making it feel like a little bit more of an event. So this is kind of two-pronged. I want to talk about the modernization effort as you perceive it, both for the event at Worlds, because you got to be there and we're so jealous, but also in general outside of it, because it does seem like they've actually hired some people who understand social media now, and several of the federations have started to make some improvements with that. But from your perspective, thinking both as a fan, as somebody who has worked in marketing and does this professionally, what is your perception of that effort at modernization? Where are they getting it right? Where is it not working? What can they do?
For sure. So just to back up a little bit, so this was the first World Championships that I've ever attended. It's a trip that I went on with my mom, which was really special, and we've had it planned since 2023. So it
Oh,
was like a
wow.
really big, exciting trip for us. And before this Worlds, I'd been to a few Skate Americas, I think around like 2014, 2015. And then the Skate America that was in Norwood, I think in 2021, I want to say.
I think that's right. Yeah.
So I've been to skating events before, but this was truly the biggest skating event I've ever been to in terms of competitors, fan attendance, in terms of prestige. And so when I was sitting in the audience, I was really comparing it to my experience at Skate America in Norwood. And it just was a huge upgrade in terms of what the fans in person were seeing in terms of the production value. It just felt like a big step up in comparison to what I've experienced. I enjoyed it. It was nice to feel like you were watching a skating event in 2025 and you had the LED boards and the Instagram handles and the individual skater introductions, and Alyssa Liu is like doing a cartwheel. Like that part was really exciting, and it made the event fun. It wasn't just a skating event. It was like this fun spectacle. I will say, like, it's very different though when you're watching on YouTube or when you're watching on your phone from home, right? Like, I remember seeing Jackie Wong tweet about the fan messages that they had on the Jumbotron, and I
Yeah.
don't believe that those were ever really shown on the actual feed. And so at one point he
No.
was like, if you're hearing like additional laughter, this is what's going on inside the rink, right? So there obviously is, I don't know if disconnect is the right word, but there was a difference in viewing experience for fans watching remotely versus in person. And I think to the extent that you can try and make those, I don't know if equal is the right word, but trying to make those cohesive, I think that will only enhance the sport. At the same time, like while I did enjoy the overall improvements and upgrades that I saw, I do think that there was still room for improvement in some of the way that things were implemented, specifically thinking about the leader's chair.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. The highly controversial.
Yes. And I think honestly, like, I hope that the ISU is doing this to a certain extent, but really surveying the skaters and asking them
Yes.
how they felt because they are the ones who are subject to that type of situation. Something that really struck me when I was meeting these skaters for interviews, and we can talk a little bit more about this later, is that they're not influencers, they're not celebrities, they are regular people who are first and foremost like athletes and artists. And so I saw a lot of people saying like it's not right to have this leader's chair in front of thousands of people where the skaters are off the ice, they have finished competing, yet they still have to perform. And I think there is a lot of merit to that because while there are some skaters who are really social media savvy and they love doing interviews, they love being in the spotlight, there are also skaters who just want to go out there and skate. And being in the leader's chair, being in front of cameras, that's just not their thing. And I don't think it's necessarily fair to subject them to that type of experience. I did see someone had said that Ashley and Adam had mentioned during a run through episode that that concept had actually come from someone from the skiing world. And I think the idea was that maybe someone who wouldn't necessarily have the media exposure, like the person who is currently leading,
Hmm.
that they would kind of get like a special moment. They get their time to shine, even if they don't ultimately end up on the podium. And so hearing that sentiment, I kind of understood it, but I felt like there were probably better ways to implement that, whether it's having the top three all there. So at least there's like,
They're not alone.
That would have been so
right.
much better because my brain immediately went to seeing Amber Glenn to Misha, actually, in the men's, where at one point he looks really emotional and the camera shoots to him in that leader's chair and he just does this like very awkward, like, no, please. And my heart broke for him because I'm like, you're being forced to sit here and continue, like you said, to perform. And that's not their native environment. That's not something that they are used to doing. And it did feel like some of them really enjoyed it. That was obvious. And it gave the audience that beautiful moment with Cowrie and Alyssa. That one moment was great, but did it warrant every competitor having to sit there awkwardly under a blanket, watching all of their competitors potentially take their spot? It felt a little painful, to say the least.
And the kiss and cry is already like a little slice of reality TV in the midst of a competition. For all of the incredible, enjoyable reactions that we get, you get the occasional person who is crushed by a terrible performance and just desperately wants to get out of there, doesn't want to be on camera anymore. It sort of reminds me, if you watch the World Series or the Super Bowl, where it all finishes up and the camera pans around everybody who won, who's celebrating, and then they've got to reserve some time to looking at the other team look dejected and seeing them like hanging their heads or crying off
I
to the
hate
side. And I'm
it.
like, we don't need to see that. We all understand what it's like to lose. We don't need that part of it. And yeah, there is something about sticking that person off to the side to just wait to see if they're like Hunger Games style eliminated from it. And it did give us some really great moments watching Denise Facilios or Adam Shaw just vibing off to the side. And that moment with Cowrie was great. But yeah, I think it definitely left something to be desired.
Yes, I think, as you both have mentioned, one of the unexpected silver linings of the leader's chair was just seeing the sportsmanship, which is something that I think when you watch skating on YouTube that doesn't really come across as much. Like these skaters, I'd say a lot of them have grown up competing against each other and they see each other at these events all over the world and are friends or friendly. And so I think the leader's chair, you did get to see that interaction, the hugging, the high fives. But as you mentioned, I feel like there were more cons to it than pros. I'm not confident it really moves the sport forward in the way that we want it to. I think going back to your initial question, Adrian, about social media specifically, I think the ISU has made improvements, and it's obvious that they recognize how important social media is in terms of advancing the sport. I've noticed they do a lot of fun videos with the skaters. Like I saw to promote the ISU awards, they asked the skaters like who would win an award for the funniest skater.
Mhm.
And I enjoyed that because you got to see a little bit more of the skaters' personalities. We learned once again that Cowrie is pretty funny, which I think heard now a few times, but it was nice to get like validation. So, they're trying to incorporate some more fun, down to earth, behind the scenes content, which I appreciate. I think one aspect of all of this that I would love to see moving forward, and I'm obviously biased, but really bringing in and acknowledging the role that content creators play in the skating world. I had applied for a media credential and unfortunately was unable to receive one. And I really only think that these events and the way that they're promoted is only strengthened when you can invite folks who have a dedicated audience who would love to see behind the scenes content and would love to see content from that event. And so going forward, I would love to see more of that type of collaboration between the ISU and skating content creators. And it doesn't even have to be in-person attendance at events. It could be some type of virtual collaboration. I had the opportunity to work with Lila Fear and Lewis Gibson. And while we weren't able to make an in-person interview work at Worlds, we still did like a joint post on Instagram together. And so there are ways to like get around, accessibility issues when it comes to people not being at an event in person. I also think that it's great to have an active social media presence, but honestly, time and time again, I hear from fans that it's other more deep-rooted issues that they believe they need to change to improve the sport, namely judging as well as accessibility. As we've mentioned, like when you don't understand the judging or the scoring for a sport, that really hurts your enjoyment of what you're watching. And
Absolutely.
it's like a cycle. You see it, the event ends, everyone flocks to Reddit or Twitter and complains about the scoring. And they do have a right to share their opinion, but then sometimes it goes too far and they're tagging skaters, and it's like they're attacking skaters for something that ultimately is out of their hands, out of their control.
Exactly.
And so I think there's a lot that can be done in terms of addressing the political and personal biases that we see. I know people have sent me their thoughts in terms of like using AI more to try and eliminate or mitigate human bias, adding more camera angles, using technology to better identify jump rotations. Then you have the age-old conversation about artistry versus athleticism. People wanting there to be changes with how PCS is factored, people wanting the ISU to address that just because you have a clean performance does not mean you also have great PCS. And so I see a lot of conversation about that. But then also there's accessibility issues too with the high cost of tickets for in-person events or different federations maybe not promoting a skating event as strategically as they can to get a bigger audience. And then also streaming and music copyright, and that's a whole other
Oh,
a whole other avenue. I mean, I remember in college, I think I had 4 or 5 free VPNs that I would just like rotate through to try
yep.
to watch skating competitions. And now that I am an adult and I am financially responsible, I like to think I do pay for a VPN because
Mhm.
honestly, that just saves me so much time and energy. But it's heartbreaking when I get these messages. It's like, I don't have this VPN, I don't have this. How do I watch this event? And I mean, there are times when I have to suggest like random people on YouTube that are posting
Yes.
performance, the random person on Twitter who finds a way to like post the 8-minute video. It's really frustrating that the sport feels so inaccessible in 2025. And I do remember at one point I heard that, I don't know if it was the ISU or another federation, they were looking into putting skating on like a streaming app, not like your HBO, not your Peacock.
Yeah.
It was
Yeah, like
some type
creating a
of
unique one. I feel like I have so much to unpack with everything you just said, Haley, just because I think that, yes, in terms of just accessibility overall, from streaming to cost to the sort of gatekeeping that feels like it's so antiquated when it comes to content creation and content creators, how they are able to engage with the sport. I feel like for a lot of people, especially the ones that are struggling to find anything to stream, that's a gateway. It is Jackie Wong. It's opening up my Blue Sky app and seeing, okay, Jackie's posting about what's happening in the practice session. So I'm not seeing it, but I feel like I'm there at least. And he is high enough profile where he actually gets access, which is I'm grateful for. But there's so many others that don't. We come from a background in the Comic-Con world. We were always at San Diego Comic-Con, and we had ridiculous amounts of access that we never ever should have had.
I think we should. We worked very hard for that access.
We
Thank you
did
very
work
much.
very hard for that access, but it was such a ridiculous difference between that and what skating is, because we had been doing our old podcast in that pop culture world and got press conferences with Seth Meyers is always the one I go to. Like, I had no business interviewing Seth Meyers in my mind, but we did the work and we got accepted and we had the credentials and we went. And yet I can't go to Skate America and get a press credential, even though I've been doing this type of work for a decade plus. And I feel terrible for like so many people who are trying to just expand the reach of the sport that has such a limited view and it is so hard to penetrate right now and grow it. And I feel the worst for the skaters themselves because it's like you look at somebody like an Amber Glenn who has a very big following herself, which is fantastic. But I want more people to know that there is an Amber Glenn out there. And because I am not as active on social as I used to be, and I am not an expert, I don't know how. And because we don't get the access we'd like to, we can't learn together, I guess is the best way to say it. That's just me venting because I'm frustrated. I'm frustrated for you.
This is a really expensive sport to compete in. During the World's feed, they were playing these packages in between the broadcasts, and one of them was an interview with Danny O'Shea, and it was him talking about the price of competing in pairs. And he was like, it cost them somewhere in the neighborhood of $50,000 to $60,000 a year to compete. I mean, when you look at coaching and costumes and travel, and not to mention physical therapy and recovery from the inevitable injuries, the skaters, some of them depend on winning prize money if they're higher up in it, or they do get some sort of stipend or scholarship from their federations. But an awful lot of the other rest of them are trying to do GoFundMe's, and they're selling stuff in order to fund it. And they need reach to be able to do that. On the flip side of it, I think that from a content creator perspective, there are a couple of issues. One, the sport has minors in it. And thankfully, seniors is now aged up, which, at least in my perspective, is a really positive thing. I'm so glad that is a change that they made. But you still have, like you said, they're normal people. They're not celebrities. They're not public figures in that way. So giving access to people, particularly if they are more private and a little bit more camera shy, you have challenges there. And also, I think where mass media, your TV, film, and stuff like that, gaming, whatever, has acclimated to the negativity that sometimes comes from the content creator sphere, because that is inevitable, unfortunately. And this is just an outsider perspective, and I don't know if maybe this is something you've encountered, but the thing I always wonder is if they've been a bit shy about engaging with the content creator sphere because of how negative it can be sometimes, because it is a sport that generates a lot of passion, but passion sometimes leads to less than savory opinions or ways of expressing it. Have you had an experience with that? Do you perceive that as well, or am I off base there?
No, no, I totally understand where you both are coming from. I think another factor in all of this is that content creators are different from journalists. I
Yes.
would not
Yes.
consider myself to be a journalist. I do not have the training or the skills that journalists have. And so it's understandable that there is kind of caution around content creators because I think we are this entity that is just kind of like, who are these people, right? It's very different from speaking with a reporter from NBC News, a well-respected media outlet where that person has covered events and written stories before and they have an editor, right? When you're a content creator, it's so different and to a certain extent, much more unstructured. But at the same time, I think taking risks is really important. And I think at the end of the day, a lot of these skating content creators really love the sport and honestly have probably similar goals to these federations and to the ISU. And so for anyone listening to this who works for the ISU, works for the US Figure Skating Association, we would love to have a conversation about how we can help each other, about how we can grow the reach of the sport and feature these amazing athletes. It's just really difficult. And as someone who I would describe myself as pretty resilient and determined, so when I got the notification that I had not received a credential, I was like, okay, well, I'm gonna find a way to work with these skaters anyways. So we're just gonna keep moving. We're just gonna have to be kind of creative and innovative. And so what I did is I just reached out to a bunch of skaters. I first started with the ones who follow me and would be more familiar with the work that I do, but I also expanded to honestly skaters who I just wanted to meet.
Of course.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Who I was just fans of. And I was really pleasantly surprised with the responses that I got because, in terms of my follower account, I am a relatively smaller account and I've only been around for a few years. And yet there were so many skaters who were really interested in meeting up and filming something and just very open to kind of doing a more unconventional type interview or video or whatever you want to call it. And so the very first interview that I did was with Yuka and Yuho, the Finnish ice dance team.
We love
Love.
them. Huge fans. Yeah.
Yes, I had the opportunity to actually film Megan Rapinoe last year, which was really
Oh,
cool. But this was the first
nice.
time that I had ever filmed content with figure skaters specifically. So I definitely was starstruck. But as I mentioned to you, and as you both can relate to this, a lot of the work that I do for my account is work that I do in my professional life. And so I think all of those kind of skills and tools and knowledge, all of that kind of came back. And we were able to create, I think, a video that people were really interested in, and it got to show more of Yuka and Yuho's personalities, and they're honestly just really, really fun people.
Big theater kid energy.
Absolutely. I mean, when Yuho said that Yuka, if she weren't a figure skater, she would be a Broadway star, I was like,
Yes.
oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And it was also one of those things where I don't know if that's ever been communicated before in previous interviews, right? So you had this like really fun moment, but you also had this moment of learning and discovery where I'm not sure if that has been shared before in interviews and conversations that they've had with other reporters or with other fans. So it was really exciting being at Worlds and getting to run around the arena and run to the athletes' hotel to film content. But obviously, it was challenging not having a credential and having to really navigate some of those difficulties. And so I really do think that collaborating with kind of more unconventional, if you want to call it, folks in the media space, I do think that can really strengthen the sport and expand its reach.
And then thinking about the event, and I want to kind of turn the angle of that lens around a little bit because I want to think about the audience there. We talked a lot about the Fed and the skaters, but thinking about the audience when we're talking about trying to get more people into it. If there's something that we worry about sometimes when we watch skating on TV, is that we see a demographic in the audience that is often quite a bit older than the skaters on the ice. And sometimes I think that's just because this is a sport where there'll be 8 or 9 separate events if you count the gala, and you have to have the money for tickets and the time you can take off for it. And that's going to count a lot of people out for a lot of these events. The first ones that we went to together back in like 2008, I think we went to the men's free at US
At
Nationals. Yeah.
nationals, yeah.
And that was the one thing we could go to at that point. And so I think that affects who you see when you're watching it from home. But we've often just kind of wondered, is the audience who's coming out to these big events, like, are we seeing kids? Are we seeing teenagers? Are we seeing more like young adults? Is the audience all 45 and older? And I say this here as the people at home can't see it, but I'm bald and I have gray in my beard, right? So like I'm aware I look like those people if you see me on screen. But what was your perception at Worlds of what that kind of audience breakdown? And this is obviously like just a perception thing. We don't have real numbers on this,
It's
but
not
like,
scientific.
right, yeah. But just from what you saw of the event, what did that audience look like? How were they made up?
I would say that obviously like my experience might differ depending on like where in the arena I was sitting, but it definitely was folks in their 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s. Honestly, I'm in my 20s and I was pretty surprised that I didn't see a ton of other people my age in the sections that I was sitting in and the sections that I was walking around in. That felt like an age group that wasn't really represented. Like you would have families with the young kids who maybe are skaters themselves. You would have maybe like the teenage, high school age, which I'm assuming that all of those kids were skaters.
Yeah, that's always the
Yeah.
first thought, right? Yeah.
Yeah. And then you would kind of have this jump. I would sometimes see couples that maybe like 30s, 40s, but then you do have this jump where it's folks in their 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s. So that was pretty surprising to me. And I guess it shouldn't really have been. In hindsight, Adrian and Wendy, you really laid out a lot of those factors that lead to kind of an older in-person crowd. But that was surprising to see. I think one thing that was also interesting is that during, I think, one of the ice resurfaces, I ended up getting something to eat. And I struck up a conversation with 2 women next to me who are not skating fans, but they live in Boston and they heard about Worlds and they wanted to like check it out. And so I think they had been to one event previously, like on one of the previous days, and then they enjoyed it so much that they actually got tickets for a second event. And so something that I was thinking about was what percentage of the audience are people who are Boston locals who just
Yes.
heard about this event because I have family in Boston and they sent a photo of like a train ad that was promoting Worlds. Like, how many of these folks are residents who were seeing the marketing around the city and decided to check it out versus people who are super fans who've had their tickets like me for the last year? Like, I think that would be an interesting breakdown. And I think having that data would also be really helpful in terms of figuring out how to promote the sport going forward, how to boost attendance going forward. I mean, I also want to take a step back and recognize that ISU is clearly aware of the need to modernize the sport. I know they have the ISU Vision 2030 strategic plan. And so this is obviously something that they're cognizant of and working towards. I feel like some people could listen to this and think that we're complaining. And I do recognize that there is a certain level of privilege in that I can sit here and say, oh, I think the ISU should do this. And as a fan, I wish I could see this. And then I'm not actually involved in like making those changes happen.
International sport makes it very complicated. It's
Absolutely.
domestically are hard enough, but yeah, internationally makes it so much worse. Yeah.
Absolutely. So I did just want to clarify that I am coming from a place of someone who genuinely wants to see the sport succeed and become more popular, as opposed to someone who feels very jaded and critical of everything that I'm seeing. I do think we have taken steps forward in several regards, but there obviously is still a lot of work to be done. I think this goes to like maybe a lack of transparency, which we've discussed throughout this conversation, but I don't know if there is like a modernization committee that's working with the ISU, whether it's retired skaters or officials or even fans that are working to implement ISU Vision 2030. Like, I'm not sure if that's a separate group of officials that are working on that or if it's just the ISU as a whole, but I would love to learn more about the actual like structure of how they are trying to implement these changes and if they ever need fans that they want to
Set up a committee, we'll join.
absolutely, if they ever need fan participation or want to pick people's brains, I would love to participate. But I did just want to acknowledge that because I think it could be easy for someone to listen to this conversation and be like, okay, well, sounds like you're just kind of complaining about things that you see that are wrong with the sport. But I do think there's a more nuanced take here.
100% agree. It's very easy to say and very difficult to do. The logistics are extensive. It's easy to say the phrase red tape, but I can't even imagine in an international sport filled with so many people that beyond language barriers and cultural barriers, they have to actually just implement rules. That alone is so mind-bogglingly tricky. However, I mean, going back to that point about the age range and kind of the gap, I think is exactly related to what we're talking about with the modernization. It's like this demographic of people has sort of like missed where skating has gone and it's trying to reach them in some capacity. So yeah, I really do hope that the ISU as part of that plan has a modernization committee or whatever they are calling it. I mean, I'm sure that they are pulling in a lot of data from these events. If we're seeing it in just plain sight, they're seeing it in their ticket sales. And it's got to be concerning when it's like, okay, what happens as the fan base ages out and continues to diminish? So how do we reach that demographic that has sort of just missed skating for an entire generation of skaters? I feel like the easiest person for me to point to is Nathan Chen. Nathan Chen is this monstrously successful, incredible skater from the US that obviously I'm a total fangirl for. But it's really upsetting sometimes when I realize like he is our reigning Olympic gold medalist and so few people have ever heard his name. They might have watched the Olympics where he won and they're like, oh, that's that kid that won, neat. And that's it. They don't remember his name. He didn't stick. I think part of that was COVID because it wasn't Olympic Games that was so quiet. That doesn't excite people whenever they're watching from home as much. But also I just think it's that to me, it was very symbolic of where the sport was going all along, where it's that feeling of people just kept falling off and falling off and falling off. And unless it was Johnny Weir, however many years earlier that was, because he was so flamboyant and so big of a personality that you could not deny him, essentially. If you weren't that, it just feels like so many people have been forgotten. And it's sad to me as a fan, but also the impetus to be like, okay, how do we regain some of these people and remind them, hey, this is a sport that you might actually enjoy. And there's a lot of people looking for things that are both exciting and artistic. It shouldn't be as niche as it is, I guess is my summary.
Skating is also kind of the other side of the coin of gymnastics, right? I mean, they operate in the same space when you think about the Olympics, the summer and winter. Like they've always kind of reflected each other in that way. And gymnastics has exploded in popularity. And a lot of that is based around Simone Biles, because you have the GOAT, you have this extraordinary personality. And I think the flip side of that, when you look at Nathan Chen, is that he is just a quiet individual. And so he just didn't sell as hard. If you look at him in group photos, he fades to the back. He's just not interested in being that person who's in the front. Versus now we have somebody who, like an Ilya Malinin, who does like to move to the front and likes to get that kind of attention. And you have Alyssa Liu, who is like, I always make the joke online that find someone who looks at you the way a camera looks at Alyssa Liu, because she's so magnetic on
She's just
camera.
bright and sunshiny, and you just want to watch whatever she does.
Right. They're the perfect vehicles, at least in the US Fed, for a younger generation. But I want to go back to something you were talking about as far as being in Boston and seeing it advertised everywhere. And we saw the venue, they had beautiful wraps. And, I still think it's kind of funny that they had pictures of Luna Hendricks up in places when she wasn't competing there. I thought that was a really odd choice. But still, it reminded us when we go to San Diego Comic-Con, where the entire town would be completely advertised out for it. But when we went to Skate America at the beginning of the season, and we were in Allen, Texas, which is just a large suburb, and when we were in town, nobody had any idea that the event was even happening. No Uber driver that we got in a car with, one, knew what the event was or even where it was. None of them even knew that the skating rink was there. They're all like, oh, I didn't even know this was here. Nobody we talked to at a restaurant had any clue. It was just like a little island, which meant that parking was free. And that was pretty cool. But like otherwise, it was just kind of lost. And even the venue just really didn't have much that said, hey, this thing's going on here for the next 4 or 5 days. And the city itself just didn't seem to have a clue. And then you go back a little bit and look at Lithuania's Euros, where they made the event inexpensive and they advertised it in a big way. And they brought a ton of people to that audience that didn't know anything about skating. They were just hyped to have this big event there. And what we got was like one of the best figure skating events we've had in years, with one of the most exciting, enthusiastic crowds. And they didn't know what they were there for. They just knew what they were watching was awesome. And so hearing that from you, being at Worlds and having that similar experience where there are people there where there were not hardcore fans. And one other thing that made me think about was when we talk about the ages. When we were at Skate America, the people around us were, a lot of them were kind of in our age bracket. We're in our late 40s. But we did actually spot a lot of like college age, mostly young women. But a thing that I thought was kind of funny about it was that we talked to a few of them because they were fans of the show, and which was awesome. But it was funny that at one point there was somebody in the front row who was giving out these like customized gifts to people like Isabeau and Ilya. They were like a super fan. And I happened to see them post on Blue Sky about it. And I added them just saying, oh my gosh, we saw you hand this out. We're like 3 rows back from you. That was a really fun moment. And their response back was, oh, I listened to your show while I was packing to come on this trip. And it was that moment of being like, oh, this is so funny. This sport and this world is so small, is so niche. We're all kind of aware of each other to a certain degree. But it was nice because it's like, we're speaking to an audience our age and younger who's enthusiastic about this. And we want this to grow. So like, how can we make it so that
we don't know everybody in the audience?
Right, exactly. Because it feels like that sometimes. So I should note that we're recording this during World Team. So the next question will not count World Team in this, but I want to know what your general impression of this season was. What were the highlights for you as a fan? I mean, obviously through the lens of a content creator as well, but just like, what are your takeaways from this season overall?
So before I address that, I really want to quickly back up because yeah, I feel like you both shared some great insights that I want to address. Yes, 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 with regards to Nathan Chen, Wendy, and just those skating icons that just for whatever reason don't seem to break into the mainstream in comparison to other skaters and athletes we've seen in the past. And I think that it should not be a requirement for you to be like an extrovert to break into the mainstream and become like a household name. And as someone who is an introvert, I really sympathize with Nathan Chen because I think you're right, Wendy. Like on paper, he's a star. He's fantastic. He is a prodigy, an icon, but for whatever reason during the Olympic season, it just didn't break through. And that's something I've been thinking about recently because we obviously are approaching the next Olympic season. And it's always interesting to me to see who kind of breaks through to the
Mm-hmm.
mainstream. And yes, it is personality driven to a certain extent, but I do feel like sometimes it's just like natural spontaneous moments. Like I'm thinking of, and I hate that I'm forgetting his name, but the gymnast with the glasses who was on
Even
Dancing with
another
Oh,
the
roster.
Stars.
Stephen Osric. Yeah.
Right. Like it literally was just a meme on Twitter that people were circulating, plus
Yep.
obviously his incredible athleticism, but then he became like a face of the most recent Olympics. And I don't know if there's an answer to that. Like, how do we get more recognition to these amazing athletes, even the ones that, and I hate this word, even the ones that on paper might not be, quote, marketable? Like, how do we, despite these hurdles, like, how do we get them in front of non-skating fans? I don't know if there's a clear-cut answer to that, but I totally hear you on that, Wendy. I feel like there was something else I was going to mention. Oh, promoting the event in Boston. I experienced something similar in that I would sometimes, be at CVS or be speaking with an Uber driver, and they just had no idea that the event was taking place, which was a little disappointing, but everyone's lives are busy. Totally understand
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
Fair.
that it's just not on the radar. I think this goes to something that we haven't really touched on, and I don't have much insight into it, but that's just the financial side to all of this, because when you're promoting an event, you obviously need the budget to
Yeah.
invest in ads and marketing. I feel like I don't know enough about that side of the sport to really comment on that piece, but I will say like that's a big piece. Like, do you have the budget to run digital ads promoting the event? Do you have the budget to do partnerships with Boston businesses? I do recall seeing that the Instagram account for Worlds had talked about some partnership that they did with like an ice cream business, which was cool. But I also was like, in a perfect world, I would love to see 10 more collaborations with other businesses in
Yes.
Boston promoting this event.
No, I love that you bring that up because I worked in digital advertising for about 13 years and the budgets can range so dramatically. But I do think that there is so much potential in especially local business partnerships. I think that that is a really, really good point. And especially, for instance, like next year's US Nationals are coming to St. Louis, which is our closest big city. And
Oh, I didn't know that. That's great.
yeah, so I have been wondering, like, basically, how can I help grassroots this in some capacity, especially as a content creator that doesn't really have access? I'm like, I'll just start pinging the US Fed and be like, talk to these people. Like, just that's it. Just keep throwing
Right.
it at them.
And to your point, like that's another way to reach those people who otherwise would not be attending a skating competition
Exactly.
Friday night. So I think that there's just a lot of opportunities there, but I think it's just difficult. And I get the sense at times that some of these organizations are underfunded, understaffed, and understandably have other important priorities they're working on. And so I think it's just trying to find the time and the resources to really make these changes. And as you mentioned, this is an international sport, so that leads to a whole host of other factors that kind of complicate progress that we could see. But it's something that I thought I would bring up because you guys were talking so much about ads and promoting worlds. In terms of this season as a whole, when I think of like my favorite moments from the season, I think back to just great performances and programs. I mean, I love Olivia and Tim's Dune program.
It's the best.
That was a team that I was really hoping to get the chance to speak with at Worlds, and unfortunately, it did not work out. But I'm hoping that at some point in the near future, we can connect and work on something because I have been a fan of Olivia's for a while now, and I just think she's so cool. I think they're a cool team. I think, as you both mentioned on previous episodes, their Dune program really represents how powerful a good program is. Like when the judges are buying what you're selling, that goes a long way
Yes.
in terms
Yes.
of rising through the ranks and having a great season and appealing to fans. So I love their program. I feel like the rise of Alyssa Liu, it's just really beautiful to see someone who left the sport at such a young age, feeling like they had accomplished everything they could, and then returning older, wiser, maybe. But still being like on paper, Alyssa Liu is still so young, and yet she's returned and won worlds in her comeback season. Like, I think just her story is so inspiring for so many reasons, and it's just been really heartwarming, especially as someone I remember watching her when she won junior nationals. So it's just incredible to kind of see her evolve and to see her growth. It's been really special. I've really enjoyed this season as a whole. It makes me excited to see the programs that we will get next season. I've been seeing some Instagram posts. I think Minerva and Nikita already got their short program choreographed, which
I saw that.
is crazy to me. And like side note, I'm like, is that typical for such an elite team to be getting their next season's program, especially an Olympic season, that program choreographed weeks after Worlds? I don't know. That seems strange to me, but maybe it's not.
There's actually a lot of people who are already getting them done. Like I saw that Han Lee and a few other people went immediately to work with Misha G. She's doing a Carmen program. And then, yeah, a number of people, I think, already had things in the works. I think that a lot of those conversations were probably happening well before Worlds as they were parsing material and figuring out what choreographer they wanted to work with. And, a thing I think about all the time for choreographers is it feels like a job that's very front loaded, because you do it all preseason, but then there's a lot of correction as time goes along. There's, particularly the best teams alter those programs over and over again until they're fine tuned to something that really works well. So I'm guessing that is part of the job, but I would think that especially the choreographers are really in demand. They're going to want as much a notice ahead of time to get working on things if they work with a ton of skaters.
Speaking of such things, today on Instagram, Yuka and Yuho, speaking of some of our favorites, shared a 90s homage that they're considering, and it was Sir Mix-a-Lot, and it destroyed me.
Oh my gosh, I'm gonna have to check that out. I'm so excited to see what they're going to do because I feel like they are a team. I mean, we'll have to discuss this at a later point in terms of the rhythm dance themes
Oh
that we're
boy, yeah.
seeing and how you two feel about that. But I do feel like Yuka and Yuho will do an excellent job with this upcoming 90s theme.
Agreed. I cannot wait to see what they do.
I mean, we were 90s kids. So for us, I mean, we spent time right around the car being like, okay, well, they could use this movie soundtrack or they could do this thing or use
Yes.
different groups trying to figure out who would match up with these. The more obscure ones, the stuff that's like, oh, this is actually more interesting. This is the deep divers that might pull something out. But we feel like we'll probably get a lot of really high level generic stuff. But the 90s was such a wild mix of music that it's a good opportunity. But just like what we saw with, say, like the 80s or the stuff this year, the taste level that gets employed can wildly swing from team to team. So
Absolutely.
who knows?
Yeah, I feel like this is an unpopular opinion, but as I grew up listening to 80s music because of my parents, and I liked the 80s theme. Obviously, there were some teams who did it better than others, and you could tell like which teams maybe had input from folks who grew up in the 80s or had
Yes.
more insights into that time period. But I liked that 80s theme, and I'm hoping that this 90s theme is successful. And for better or for worse, it always generates a lot of conversation among
Yes.
fans, and it will be interesting to see how people receive it. People being non-skating fans, how they'll receive it during an Olympic season.
That's the key. I'm really excited to see that at the Olympics because I actually do think it's going to be a good gateway for people, depending on the material, but I'm hopeful.
Haley, thank you so much for joining us for this conversation. I think a lot of this was really enlightening and I really appreciate your perspective on all of this. Can you remind people where they should find you, what they should be looking for, what you do with your channel, who's it for, all that kind of stuff?
Yes, so I'm on Instagram, FS.SkatingStan. I post analyses, news, videos, fun graphic design posts, really with the ultimate goal of starting conversations about how we can modernize and improve the wonderful sport of figure skating. So I'm on Instagram, Threads, YouTube, and Substack. And if you ever have a suggestion on what I should post next or a question for me, always feel free to reach out and send me a DM on Instagram.
That's all awesome. I hope people go and follow your accounts. Those have been really helpful for us, and we really enjoy seeing that. And just seeing the level of quality raise up in the content creator sphere is really important to us. And I think it just benefits everybody, the fans, the sport, the skaters, everybody. So I really appreciate everything that you do. And then Wendy and I will be back to you in the next week with more off-season stuff about skating. I don't know what it's going to be yet. We'll figure it out when we
We'll
get
figure that out.
Yeah. And so for Scoreography, I'm Adrian Buskey.
And I'm Wendy Buskey.
And we will talk to you next time.
Bye.